Welcome to the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. Glad to have you with us. I appreciate if you're joining from LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. Welcome. And this is the weekly episode of our podcast. And we're here each Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern. And I always like to share a little bit about the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast to explain how we see the concept of wisdom. And I wanted to give you, I always like to mention that during this broadcast, because I am also the speaker as well as producer and so on, that I have to monitor a couple of different screens, so if I seem distracted, I promise I'm not. So from a vantage point that we come from on this podcast is that wisdom is a journey, and it's made up of 3 steps to the journey. And the first step in that journey is to gain knowledge. Good morning, or welcome, Karen, and Jeremy, and Sharon. Thank you for being here. And so first step in the process to gaining wisdom is to gain knowledge, facts, figures, information. Fortunately, we can gain that in so many ways now through the internet and other reading and so on. So lots of ways to get that knowledge. Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Sarika, Sharif. Welcome. So the next step in this journey towards wisdom is the step of understanding, or what another word for it is experience. And that's where we take the knowledge we have gained and we begin to do something with it, hopefully apply it, including learning from it and figuring out ways to use it effectively, and growing in that process. So that's the second step in wisdom seeking. The third step, it has to do with taking our knowledge and understanding and turning it to wisdom. And so help you understand wisdom. Wisdom is where we take our knowledge and understanding and we begin to see it in a much bigger context. We see it especially outside of our own self, and that becomes very important because what we begin to do is consider how what we do and how it relates not just to us and our personal effect, but to those around us and even in the larger world. Welcome, Antonio. Glad to have you as well. And so the process goes from gaining knowledge to getting understanding from experience, and then looking at those pieces from the bigger picture. And for those of us that are faith people, we also consider that we are the ultimate goal is to look at those knowledge and experience through God's eyes and God's will for our life. And so much bigger perspective. Key thing is seeing things from outside of ourselves. So important. So that's what we talk about when we talk about wisdom on the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. And glad to have everyone here. Winnie, glad to have you here. And appreciate you all commenting, writing in the comments. That's helpful. And be sure to include your questions as we go along, or comments as we go along. Like to share those and even share them on the screen. So want to move forward. I am honored to have a friend, a colleague, as our guest. He's also here locally where I live, so we get to have coffee on occasion. His name is Sam Delgado. Sam is a former educator. We have worked in several environments related to education, and I look forward to Sam sharing his experience and his wisdom today, and specifically about education, because we need to gain a lot of wisdom about education and making decisions related to that, because they impact us remarkably. So without further ado, let's bring Sam on. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Kevin, and good morning, everyone. Just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
And Sam, tell our audience a little bit about yourself so they can get to know you, and maybe a little bit about your wisdom journey, especially in any area, but especially in the area of education. Welcome, Dahlia. Glad to have you. Glad to see you this morning. Thanks, Ricky. We love you too, man. All right, go ahead.
Well, basically, as you were saying, I've been involved in education now for 10 years, but it wasn't my original part of my consciousness of sorts. I'm originally from, just some background, I'm originally from Cuba. I was born in Cuba and came to the U.S. in 1969. So that was a while back, if you all can remember along those times. And I was basically raised in Florida. So South Florida, Miami area. I was there the majority of my life, and ended up moving to Georgia back in 2006, and which was actually at the point that I had that major transition as far as career-wise anyway, insofar as going into academia. So my background was in initially construction management. So I went to Florida International University when construction management, just at the point where construction management was becoming its own discipline of sorts. So the programs were fresh at that time, and then went into it was not after until after I came to Georgia that I went and got my master's. So and initially, I was a bachelor's in construction management, and way back when, 1987, again, a long time ago. And then I did my master's in 2010. I did a master's in business management. But I started when we moved to Georgia, started teaching as a substitute teacher initially, and then went into the, for those in the audience that are not aware, in Georgia, there are two systems. There's the technical college system of Georgia, and then there's the university system of Georgia. I have been very, very fortunate to have been involved in both, and also involved in the K-12, although very briefly. So I have been exposed to the full gamut of those experiences. So in the technical end, at the university, more traditional end. So my biggest tenure was in the technical college system, 8 years, and then 2 years at the university environment.
Very good, very good. And Sharon, glad to know that you're coming from New Jersey, and appreciate others sharing. Ricky's a fellow Georgian from, I believe, maybe downtown, more downtown area. And so we've got quite an audience. I believe we are international, so that's a good thing as well. So I know, Sam, you and I have talked at length about the education system. We have worked together in various arenas, both in the technical college, university, and then even through an organization that we like, Skills USA, and the efforts there. And welcome, Petra from Germany. Glad to have you here today. Rosemary, good to have you again from Sydney, Australia. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on the concept of it takes a village. It's an interesting concept, a challenging concept, because I know that I appreciate the comment and the idea behind takes a village, but I think we may need to keep it in perspective, shall we say?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've as I was thinking about how to even begin a conversation on education, I know you've already covered some aspects of the history behind education and so on and so forth. And the great thing is that this is such a wonderful opportunity because obviously we're not talking within just geographically, not just within the state of Georgia, not just nationally, continental US, we're talking globally. So you have an audience that has that wide global perspective, which I think is the critical aspect of it. Because even on the last podcast you had and those exchanges provided me with, it just ratified some of the same things that I was thinking about in terms of, hey, we're all different and coming from all these different backgrounds, these different structured environments or what have you, but we're discovering that we're more alike than different, and that is no different in education. So I was thinking about this and I said, okay, let's take some of the stuff that we might be familiar with. One being it takes a village to raise a child concept, and see what that means in terms of perhaps on how we have interpreted education in our own individual minds. So to me, it takes a village to raise a child. And I'll start with what it doesn't mean to me. What it doesn't mean to me is interpret that to mean raise my child. So that's where I'm coming from that aspect of it. That when we think in terms of it takes a village to raise a child, just that blanket statement, there is definitely truth behind that, but then we have to be very careful how we interpret those blanket statements that we are so accustomed to using.
Yeah.
So in terms of education, that's one focus, and using that concept, right?
Yeah. It's the thing that's interesting to me, and that because of my work in generations and understanding how the generations have been impacted, one of the areas that I looked at 5 areas across 5 generations to understand where we are in the workforce. And one of those is education. And the shift from my generation, education was considered a supplement to what goes on at home. It was an ancillary part or an extension of the home, in that what parents could not teach their children in terms of learning or didn't have even the time. They relied on the school to teach in terms of functional literacy. As the old saying goes, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so that was what it historically has been, as an extension of the home. But you fast forward to especially Gen Y, millennials, Gen Zs, education has really unfortunately taken the role, more of the role of the home, and taken it over. And we as parents and grandparents, we're guilty of allowing that to happen, and to the point that unfortunately for many families, education is doing more to raise their children than the parents are.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the problems, and there are many, obviously, I think one of the issues with education is that the classroom has become a lab, or it's always been a lab of sorts. And we're testing out, we're little, our students are, I don't, not to be demeaning or anything, but we were little lab rats. I mean, in the bigger context. So, so how that's being addressed is very important, because it obviously, we talk about the formative years of children, right? And it starts very early. Within the first 7 years, that will make or break who you're going to basically become as an adult, and how you're going to handle life situations and all that. And I think, historically, if you go back, what are the factors that have played in? Obviously, we were in a situation way back when it was, you didn't have both parents necessarily being out working full time, right? Things of that nature. So that influences now that there's depleting resources at home. And I would emphasize that the key to all the problems, if you're going to go root cause, I would say it's the family structure, but that we can get to that and discuss on that level. But yeah, I think that those have been some of the things that have influenced, obviously. And then we have kind of, in our effort to and we're, that's the other thing I want to talk about: intention versus actual outcomes. It's not to say that people are ill-intended. I think, generally speaking, we, as a society, we are well-intended to do the best that we can to solve issues, but the way we go about it doesn't necessarily reflect the best, or things come into play that alter, those intentions, and they become something totally different. And I think that's part of the problem.
Well, part of the wisdom we need to gain is to realize when we start to do something, we have intended consequences. And I'm with you. A lot of people are well intended, but what I see a lot of, and the problem becomes unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
And that is what gets us in trouble. I mean, we see that not only in education, we see it in medicine, because now we have a whole aspect of bioethics, and now that we can artificially keep people alive, now we have to struggle with the whole concept of when do we stop trying, or do we start trying. And so definitely intentions are a factor, but there is more to it than the intentions. And I wanted to mention Antonio is from the Atlanta area as well. Sounds like we could have a gathering of number of folks here in Georgia sometime, Sam.
Oh, I think it'll be great. It'll be great.
So tell us a little bit about, as an educator, we all have been dealing with the No Child Left Behind. And that draws a lot of responses from a lot of people. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on No Child Left Behind.
Yes, and this ties directly back into intention, right? So you say this, you make this blanket statement, right? No child left behind. Who would argue that, right? So you're gonna, right? It sounds beautiful. It is a wonderful concept, and it is. And but then you now go into, okay, what are we looking at? So when we had, and this is for the folks that particularly who are not in the States, obviously. So we had the No Child Left Behind Act back in 2001 under the Bush administration. And to me, what that term, and when that term first came out, I wasn't even, I wasn't even in academia, but it kind of struck a nerve. In the back of my head, my little spidey senses said, this is going to spell trouble somehow. I don't know. Innately, I kind of guess I knew that. But to me, this is a case in irony, right? Because if we look at intention versus outcome, right? Under this act, we had what's called the Title I, which is that the aspects of Title I here in the States, this was trying to address the quote unquote disadvantaged students or disadvantaged student populations. I have taught at the middle school level under Title I program. So, and that was a very short-lived experience for a reason.
Yeah.
But in
middle school teachers, they are challenging. My wife was a middle school teacher as well, and yeah, I understand.
Well, that short experience in itself exposed to me a wealth of knowledge, just from the interaction with the kids, and picking up on why this idea. It's very true. It's why that category of disadvantaged is a reality, but we don't understand because we're not. What I feel is we never go to the root cause of those things, which is much greater than what we of what we give it as being. And again, I'm going back to the family nucleus aspect of it, which we are very limited in our control. And that's another aspect. Yeah. So when you're talking about No Child Left Behind, you're talking about an idea that we can actually control things.
It really is an interesting concept of No Child Left Behind. First of all, part of it is we have to consider what strikes me is the idea that education makes us better. And that is part of that whole thinking with No Child Left Behind, that somehow it does make us better. But the reality is that education just makes us more educated. Now, there can be advantages with that. I get that. But what makes us better is character. And unfortunately, in education, that is less and less a priority, either by design or even by curriculum. And so just some real challenges. Let me give a shout out to Fanny from Dallas. Welcome. Cheryl from Mumbai. Welcome. And then let's see, let's share, because Petra has some perspective from Europe as to the concept of No Child Left Behind. Let's see. We have the same concept of No Child Left Behind in Germany, but due to Corona and insufficient online training experience, many are falling behind. There's talk of the lost Corona generation, especially for migrants. Insightful. So the concept of No Child Left Behind by title is unique to the U.S., but in concept, sounds like it is much wider spread across different countries. So good information. Thank you, Petra.
Yeah, and I would say in relationship to that, this is the whole thing now, how technology is playing in, how the whole situation with Corona, right? So we have to now question if being disadvantaged includes into that access to technology.
Mm.
So it's just an even more complicated issue, because what I'm sure that they're finding now is that the engagement, if you're from my own experience, right, and within that bigger context of disadvantaged, talking about family, right, not having
Right.
the family nucleus as the resource, the main resource there, but now add to that potentially not having the technological access to then be able to be engaged, within this new normal of education online, then that's just exacerbating the problem for those specific groups of students that are
Mm-hmm.
at greatest risk. And so this is a great challenge, and this is something we're gonna need to wrap our heads around and try to resolve. So we'll talk about issues of what is and then we'll get into that as far as this same
Sure.
concept. The words that get thrown out there as far as
Yeah.
equity and all that, right?
Right.
So if we're talking about that in terms of access to the resources, then we need to include technology as part of that. And then at what point is it, do we look at it as a society that that is imperative? So if it's something that's imperative, right, everyone, and we've talked about providing the resources so everyone has access to the internet.
Right.
Simple as that, right? Because it's become who can now survive without the internet? I mean, you can, obviously, but it's not generally, you want to fall off the grid. And believe me, I thought about that myself. But you find yourself, hey, you know what? Technology is a ruling factor in everything that I do nowadays.
Right. Well, welcome, Ms. Tucci. Glad to have you. Appreciate the love being sent. We can all use that for sure. And so, yeah, the technology is a whole another interesting element of education, because although education has adopted technology to a point, it's rather interesting that it still, in its core philosophy, doesn't embrace it. And what comes to mind there is a friend on LinkedIn, Dr. I. Addison Zhang, is a former professor that now operates a new approach to education called Classroom Without Walls. Well, interesting that she was actually, part of her job at the university was to teach about technology, social media, and things. And if I remember, I hope I'm not misquoting, but in conversations with her, she was supposed to be teaching it, but there were, I believe, policies that were counter to using social media as students, and some things. So it was rather interesting there. When I was teaching in the high school environment, it was when they first started experimenting with issuing computers, and they started with teachers. And again, how they approached that, and it was as if, yeah, we want to say that we're embracing technology, but we're really not. We're just kind of throwing it in the mix just as an incidental. And what we're finding out now as a result of Corona is that education had not embraced technology systemically, because it became such an upheaval. If nothing else, we haven't prepared teachers to be able to instruct in the technological environment. And there are a few that adapted, but on the whole, we were really challenged. So let's see, Rosemary has shared a comment, so let me put that up and let's see what Rosemary shared. Says, if I had waited until my children had started school for them to be educated, I would have failed each of them. My children started to learn to count when they were babes in arms. They started to learn to read when they were sat in the shopping trolley for family shopping trip. They started to read poetry. So the point is, and it's well made, Rosemary. Thanks for sharing that. Is what I think, and this is something that we are talking about, referring to, related to the intentions and outcomes. But what Rosemary's talking about is parents taking responsibility for the education of their child and not solely depending on the education system to do so. And what correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, isn't it pretty clear that one of the deciding factors in a successful student is the involvement of the parent in their early education? Now, there are some parents take it to an extreme and forget to let go of their children, but early on, they do not take responsibility for that. Your thoughts?
Well, the thing is, in terms of education, when you say education, and when you say um, creating a well-rounded individual, I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is that being a support system to help you reach your highest potential, right? Get you prepared for life. So to me personally, the aspect of the core knowledge that would be your basics of math, language, et cetera, is not as important, and I carefully, saying that, as the things that really make that individual capable to apply that knowledge. And this is what we faced in our educational system. When we're talking about it taking over as the village, we are expecting that to be the place where students evolve in terms of emotionally and so on and so forth. That's part of that process. But now it's been handed over, basically, to the teacher, each teacher, expecting them to be, you have to be a psychologist. You have to know about health, right? Talk about it, and then the accountability that goes along with all that. So we discovered that students now don't have things like, again, other terms, emotional intelligence. What's that all about? It goes back to the same thing of, if the support is not there at the family level, those are the things that are going to affect, your sense of worth. That alone is going to determine how successful you are in life. And if that is not there in terms of the family unit, and then it's it's expected to be provided under something that's really, at the end of the day, a government run operation, unless you're in private school and whatever, then that's where issues come in. I wanted to also look at, and still with No Child Left Behind, and make a correlation here, because
Hey, Sam, can I stop for a second? Cheryl has got a comment that I thought was interesting. It was referring to the technology. She says, so technology is ruling, yes. New approach without walls is what she is doing for underprivileged kids in Mumbai. So value there to be able to reach the others. And then want to share, before we get too far off, Rosemary has a comment. She says she disagrees about a child will learn if the learning path is wide and interesting. All of that comes from the village concept. Not sure that there is opposition to the village concept.
Right.
Think it is more about responsibility. Is that the way you would approach it, Sam?
Right. Well, that's the whole thing. If you're talking about a holistic approach, definitely. I mean, but I think in the classroom environment, if it's going to be anything, it should be a support to what is already taking place in the home, which you would, in an ideal world, that would be the right environment, right? My whole issue is not thinking in terms of replacing what needs to happen at home,
Right.
and unfortunately, that's the big challenge, because when we're talking about disenfranchisement of populations, entire populations, and we start looking at what are the aspects behind that,
Right.
the economy of, where are they being raised up? I mean, for goodness sake, when I had an opportunity very briefly to talk to some of these students, and I would learn about what they were going home to, then it's like, hey, hello, these are the same things that we know. We know these things. We know these things are going on, and we're trying to grapple with helping mitigate those impacts. But realistically, what we can actually control, and that's the other aspect of it, under the No Child Left Behind, one of the aspects of that was accountability, right? And I always ask myself, you expect me as a teacher to be accountable for something I cannot fully control?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a major problem. I think that's one of our...
Yeah, and the idea, and as a teacher, most of my colleagues, and having been a teacher trainer and worked with a lot of different teachers, I think that most every teacher would echo that they would rather not have all of the social responsibility that has been put on them in the current education model, part of the outcome of No Child Left Behind. They would rather be teaching and presenting what their area of expertise, if you will, and not have to deal with the social aspects that parents and the home should be preparing young people for. I think that the concept is not that teachers are not a part of the effect on our children. It's just they're not responsible for raising our children. In other words, teaching them character, teaching them those things, because frankly, as a teacher, I know I made the effort to help disadvantaged, because over half my population were classified in that realm. But I had limited time, resources to be able to do that and still do a good job of teaching. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? Am I correct there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here's the thing: I wanted to make a correlation here to say, it just since my background is also in business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at No Child Left Behind and some of the things that made it what it was intentioned to be. And these are the things: high standards. Anyone going to argue about higher standards? Metrics. Okay, now metrics focused on testing, right? So this was the basis of that. But then you go to testing and then accountability, which we just talked about. So you have those quote unquote measurable goals to improve individual outcomes, and that's the key for me. So we're looking at something standardized to improve individual outcomes, right? So to me, are these things not the same as our business model that we've been brought up to follow throughout our lives? What makes success, right? And these are those concepts, right? Or the bulk of those. So when we start looking at, okay, how do we level the field? Provide equal opportunity, right? In terms of equity, and then you say, okay, so equity. What is equity? Okay, we're talking about just and fairness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Access, et cetera, all these things. So the goal is correct in terms of opportunity, right? Providing opportunity
Right.
to for everyone to attain their highest potential. So if we see it as that lofty goal, however, what is the underlying presumed outcome? And how I see it that way is that all students are or can become equal. Okay, and this is faulty logic
Mm.
for me, because we're going back to, again, measuring our measurable goals are looking at something that's standard for individuals.
Right.
So
Well,
we start throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we go to STEM, and we leave out the arts. We start eliminating things that we had earlier in as part of this lab that proved to be of benefit, recreation, that things as simple as those. So
yeah.
that's
By the way, Rosemary, thank you for bringing up a point of disagreement. I encourage that we have challenges and discussion because it's value. And Cheryl commented that the concept in India is to do a good job. I assume that's related to education. And she agreed also that holistic approach is important. In fact, that came out in the last Wisdom Seeker that, the comment that was made by one of the participants is that learning styles is a myth. And I get that where they're coming from because we all learn in multiple ways. The whole learning style concept is we have dominant learning styles, and the problem that we have in the current education system is it's not holistic. It is primarily the learning style that's primarily targeted is that of auditory learners. And it goes back to what you were talking about because what you're describing is production learning. Okay, almost like a production line, assembly line that we're running people through with the assumption that they can all reach the same level of outcome. And even what's scarier is that they should all reach the same level of outcome. And then what that outcome is another problem. And one of my pet peeves is that current K-12 system, the outcome that is considered successful in the current education environment is an outcome of everyone's going to go to the university. And it drives all the priority in terms of time spent, resources spent, and so on in the education system. And it is, in my opinion, definitely a flawed idea. The idea is that what you said, opportunity for everyone to learn. How they will take advantage of that will vary. And not everyone will, or should be looking for only the opportunity for university, because there are so many other options to continue learning after the K-12 system.
but unfortunately, here's my pet thing with that
Mm-hmm.
is that what we have done as a society is we have segregated people to a
Mm.
point that they start self-identifying themselves. And part of that is that when you're talking about technical, you say,
Mm-hmm.
oh Yes, let's provide an opportunity. What really we are saying on that level, or what is subconsciously being students are being told, is we're going to put you on track to go to a technical type of environment because you cannot make it in the real educational. This is the subconscious messages that we're actually sending out, whether we realize it or not. And I think that's the issue. So we're segregating students, putting them on a track now based on what we perceive to be non-performers. Why? Because, oh, they can't handle the math. Oh, they can't properly, speak the language, right? So they're incompetent. They can't deal with this. So let's put them over here so that they can actually work and make a living. And that's not the right message. And we have failed miserably, I think, in really sending the correct message that there is no lesser, an honor to be someone who's contributing to society in one role versus another.
Right.
We don't all need a bachelor's degree. We don't all need a master's degree. You are at the end of the day, what are you contributing, bringing to society as a whole, and that's I think part of the message that needs to be changed. I wanted to touch really quickly because when we're talking, one of the things we shouldn't also forget is in terms of culturally, there are cultural drivers in education as well. And so we have, and this is part of my experience as well, those cultures that make an emphasis on one thing versus the other, performance based on certain things versus others, and that factors in as well. So I just wanted to mention that we seem to be confused when we look at, hey, what, culturally these groups of people seem to do very well, right? Very well, in what we understand that in performance on certain things, and then, well, there's a reason for that. There has to be some reason. It just doesn't happen. So what is that culture? Let's look at what are the things that enforce that type of behavior, and then what can we drive? How can we use that to our benefit for other, for folks that maybe are not following that along those lines, I guess.
Yeah, it gets to the concept of, unfortunately, what I have come to realize is affecting education, and it has crept into business, and it is a concept called universal education. And what the concept and model is that the universal education would teach us that in order to be a well-rounded person, it is the responsibility of education to do that. And the flaw in that concept, first of all, is education has become life to so many people, to the point that even here in our area, there's a demographic that has been identified. And what's interesting is it's not socioeconomic disadvantage. It's actually affluent young people that the suicide rate has climbed because they don't attain educational goals. They don't make the right test score. They don't get into the university they want. They don't make the football team, whatever. That all of this has become life as a result of this inappropriate priority and inappropriate focus on institutional education. Now, one thing I like to always remind people is I am all for learning. I am an avid learner. I am one of the most curious people around, to a point as a youngster I used to drive people crazy asking lots of questions. And in fact, I used to make my teachers mad in middle school and high school because I would ask questions about why we were doing something this way, and they would say, well, because that's the way we're supposed to do it. And so
Right.
Rosemary's got a comment. Let's bring it up. Rosemary says, we're moving away from the aim of university post-high school. We have apprentice-based training that starts when the student reaches 16, and talking about how that works. So yes, they're part of what we, Rosemary, thank you for that, because apprenticeships is a great alternative for a lot of young people. And what we've got to do is to, like you said, we've got to move away from the idea that education through university is the goal for everybody. Education, the primary purpose of education is so that we can communicate in a literate fashion and be able to understand information to make choices and judgments. It is not to make us a better person or a more well-rounded person. That is not the function of education. Reality is that's a function of the home, like we talked about earlier. And that's where the village concept comes in, is that the education part of the village is to help with the math and some of the basic concepts that help us to function, but not to raise our children. Definitely.
I'd like to dovetail from that discussion to see how far down the rabbit hole we all want to go. So, and engaging that type of conversation, because I think it is right now it is the most significant type of discussion that we can have. And this is, and I don't know, Kevin, if you want to go ahead and, because I don't know time-wise how we're doing, but if you want to go ahead.
Got about 8 minutes or so.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's maybe I can put this out there, and maybe we can see what how people respond to that, to maybe have a deeper look at it. But I don't know if you want to or can share that third slide on the that I had sent you.
I can.
Okay, great. So this is where Alice is going down the rabbit hole here. Okay. This is some of the things that I think that we really need to start looking at very, very carefully. And this is beyond education. This is an all-encompassing type of situation. I think there we're very familiar with isms, right? So here's the deal, and here's how I think in terms of drivers that impact things. So I think that there's always been an inherent struggle between different isms, right? And that these are the stuff in the soup that ultimately impacts how we practice, because you always hear about that. Practice what you preach. Well, what are we preaching, right?
Yeah.
And then, and this is the thing. To me, and this is something I would always tell students, you have to have a world vision. Why? And from business, we know you have a mission and a vision statement. Well, why do you have that? Well, there's a reason for a very good reason, because that's going to drive everything that you do. And education is no different. And this is the realm where we as educators are really losing control, because we are becoming just part of that lab. We're also lab rats in my mind. So when we talk about accountability and what can teachers actually bring into the classroom as something to contribute from their own experiences, if you really look at what that is all about nowadays, you are I mean, for crying out loud, when I found out that teachers have to carry liability insurance,
Yeah.
and I found that out from my wife, and it was like $1 million, I said, holy moly, seriously? This is the reality we are living. We are in fear of our lives of sharing knowledge, actually. This has become the thing right now. So this is for probably a whole entire other conversation, and I would love to, bring it in. But this is and that would lead to the, and to close maybe on that fourth slide, I don't know, and then see if anyone has anything along these lines, because again, having that international, that global view, this is how we're learning from one another, and to really become engaged in how are we going to address these very significant aspects of our modern day lives. So I don't know, on that fourth slide, if
Let's see here.
I don't.
There you go.
Okay, so now we're going in deeper into the hole, right? So again, from my own experiences, from what I'm seeing as an observer, and I am not currently involved in academia, but I will tell you what we're experiencing right now is of great significance, because it's going to alter, if we are not paying attention, it's going to alter the entire landscape of life, which includes, education. So here I'm going into, the aspects of how are we communicating our narratives, and who has control of those narratives, and how is that potentially going to influence what we do moving forward. Because
Right.
we're not looking at any type of smooth transition here, in my opinion. We are looking at a drastic, for those of you who are, aware of all these things, on a drastic global reset that is all encompassing. And I think that conversation needs to be had, and it's one that obviously is going to trigger a lot of emotional and intellectual rigor, I think.
Well, and kind of to draw it together, because we are running out of time. Yes, a lot of the problems I think that we're facing in education currently is, for example, what we've just shared with these slides, is that parents who are responsible for raising and, by the way, educating their children are not aware of these background pieces related to education. The assumption is that education is going along and it's all going in the good, right direction, and we shouldn't challenge or question it. So the takeaway as a parent, and now as a grandparent, what I do is I'm going, okay, is this what my child needs to be exposed to? Is this working in a way that it is indeed supporting my values, my family values, my whatever? And so the takeaway that I would really strongly encourage parents, don't assume that the education system is running along nicely and you can be hands off and removed. One of the best things you can do is to be involved in education decision, education policy, and know what's going on, even curriculum. Know what is being taught in your schools, because you don't have the luxury any longer of assuming that the education is a good neighbor and that they're teaching the values that you feel like that would be good for your youngsters. In fact, what I personally would like to see is that we get away from the idea of teaching values, teaching these kinds of things in education. Leave that for the family in the home, and let what education focuses on is teaching what is good training or education or learning for the child to be able to function in areas that the teachers have their expertise in. Leave the other out of it, and then we would probably have more time to be holistic in how we educate our children. So much of the time we're dealing with now is dealing with these other things, and that is a part of the problem. Well, we're up against the clock. Sam, thanks for being here. And Karen was apparently, it opened her eyes knowing teachers had to have liability insurance. It's true. Been there. It was part of our membership and association. So my thought is that we didn't make it through, that I'm going to need to at least do one more episode on wisdom related to education. I think that a lot of eye-opening, and I appreciate the background conversation between participants. That's great, because part of what we want here is not to just spoon feed wisdom, if you would, but to challenge people to find wisdom for themselves and share along the way. So appreciate everybody. Any final comment real quick, Sam, before we wrap up?
No, just I think again, this is such a wonderful opportunity, because we are engaging an audience that is global, if you will. And so I think that you're doing a great service, Kevin. And I do hope that we can maximize these opportunities by becoming engaged, by having these conversations that are so critical. So I greatly appreciate you having me on and being part of that in whatever form I can.
Well, I appreciate it, and it may be that we need to arrange another visit based on some of the comments that people have enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate your input. So we may team up again and see, because this is such a critical concept in our society and affecting where we're going. So thanks, Sam. I appreciate you taking time and sharing your wisdom. And everyone that's participated today, thank you. It has been great to see everybody communicating with us as well as each other. This is a great opportunity to grow and to gain and share wisdom together. So thank you. Join next week, same time. I'll go ahead and tell you, we'll talk education again next week. So plan to come back and join us Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And I would mess up, so I'm not going to talk about other time zones, but I'll put out notices. And thank you, everybody. God bless. Have an amazing week. Take care.
Thank you.